You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we are going to dare take a look at the world of philanthropy. The good, the bad, and the ugly. It seems like such a wonderful thing, but if you look closely beneath the surface, you sometimes find creepy crawlies. On the other hand, you sometimes find humane, intelligent, resourceful people devising practical as well as idealistic solutions to our various crises. My guest for the conversation this week is one such person, Patti Chang, co-founder and CEO of the Feed the Hunger Foundation. But before we talk with her and learn things we didn't know, we need to go inside the headlines. The word philanthropy comes from ancient Greek, from phil, love of, and anthropos, humankind. In the 2nd century CE, Plutarch used the Greek concept of philanthropia to describe superior human beings. But then, during the Middle Ages, philanthropia was superseded across Europe by Christianity and the supposed Christian virtue of charity, caritas in Latin, selfless love, valued especially for one's own salvation and escape from purgatory, which doesn't seem very selfless to me. Anyway, parochial and civic charities grew over time, established by bequests and operated by local church parishes or guilds. During the 18th century, however, a more activist Protestant tradition of direct charitable engagement took hold. For example, in 1739, appalled by the number of abandoned children living on the streets of London, Thomas Coram received a royal charter to establish the Foundling Hospital to look after the orphans, and that set the pattern for incorporating associational charities in general. The Magdalen, it's spelled Magdalene, Hospital for Prostituted Women was another such voluntary association funded by subscription, and it did raise public awareness of such activities through the emerging popular press. Of course, a century later we would learn of the horrors that took place there, particularly the Magdalen laundries. Things became more openly political when William Wilberforce, of a prominent British philanthropist and anti-slavery campaigner, entered the picture. Philanthropists began to adopt active campaigning roles. They were championing causes and lobbying governments for legislative change against ill treatment of animals and children, for instance. The Wilberforce campaign, of course, succeeded in ending the slave trade throughout the British Empire, beginning in 1807. There were no slaves allowed in Britain itself, though many rich men owned sugar plantations in the West Indies and resisted mightily the movement to buy them out, until it finally succeeded and overwhelmed them in 1833. In 1863, the Swiss businessman Henry Dunant used his fortune to fund the Geneva Society for Public Welfare, which was to become the International Committee of the Red Cross. Meanwhile, in France, the Pasteur Institute had a monopoly of specialized microbiological knowledge that allowed it to raise money for serum production, both private and public funding sources, walking a tightrope between commercial pharmaceutical venture and philanthropic enterprise. And that telegraphs something that's going to occur later, so keep an eye out for it. By 1933, at the depth of the Great Depression, the French wanted a welfare state to relieve distress, but they didn't want new taxes. So war veterans came up with a solution, the new national lottery, proved highly popular for gamblers especially, while generating the cash needed without raising taxes. American money became invaluable, and the Rockefeller Foundation opened an office in Paris, helping to design and fund France's modern public health system. The history of modern philanthropy in Europe is especially important in the case of Germany, which became a model for others regarding the welfare state. Princes in various imperial states continued traditional philanthropic efforts, many of them self-aggrandizing, like buildings, parks, statuary, art collections. But starting in the early 19th century, the emerging middle classes made local philanthropy a major endeavor to establish that they had their own legitimate role in shaping society, in contrast to the aristocracy and to the military. They concentrated on support for social welfare institutions, higher education, and cultural institutions. Religion was a divisive element, though, especially in Germany, since the Protestants and Catholics used alternative philanthropic strategies. Catholics persisted in their practice of bequeathing financial donations in wills to lighten punishment in purgatory after death. Protestants, who didn't believe in purgatory, made a strong commitment to the improvement of their communities in the now. Conservative Protestants, however, raised concerns about deviant sexuality, alcoholism, and socialism, as well as illegitimate so-called births. They used philanthropy to try to eradicate what they considered social evils that were perceived as sinful. Does this sound familiar? Meanwhile, in a leap back in time, we find that the first philanthropic corporation founded in the 13 colonies of the New World was Harvard College in 1636, designed primarily to train young men, for the clergy. Cotton Mather, the famous, or infamous if you count the Salem trials for witchcraft, the Puritan who lived in 1710, published a widely read essay, Bonifacius, or An Essay to Do Good. Concerned that idealism had eroded, he advocated philanthropic benefaction as a way of life. Benjamin Franklin was both an activist and a theorist of American philanthropy, influenced both by Mather and by Daniel Defoe's book, An Essay on Projects. Franklin tried to motivate his fellow Philadelphians into projects for bettering the city, including the Library Company of Philadelphia. That was the first American subscription library, the fire department, police force, street lighting, and a hospital. He also promoted scientific organizations like the Philadelphia Academy, which was to become the University of Pennsylvania. Now, by the 1820s, newly rich American businessmen were initiating philanthropic work with respect to private colleges and hospitals. George Peabody was acknowledged as the father of modern philanthropy, a financier based in Baltimore and in London, both in the 1860s. He endowed libraries and museums in the United States, and he funded housing for poor people in London. And his activities, in turn, became the model for Andrew Carnegie and others. In the early 20th century, Carnegie was the most influential leader of philanthropy on a national scale. He financed over 1,800 libraries across the nation. His final and largest project was the Carnegie Corporation of New York, founded in 1911. He gave away 90% of his fortune. Other prominent early 20th century American philanthropists included John D. Rockefeller, Julius Rosenwald, and Margaret Olivia Slocum Sage, the widow of robber baron Russell Sage, who, at his death in 1906, inherited a fortune estimated at more than $63 million, to be used at her discretion. Now, this was an unusual phenomenon, a woman open about being in the field of philanthropy this early on. Sage was a former teacher. She strongly supported education, established the Russell Sage Foundation in 1907, and founded Russell Sage College, as well as endowing programs for women. More about the role of women in philanthropy later on, and women in the suffrage movement who were philanthropists, and in the women's movement today. More about all that later on in Fighting Words. Meanwhile, the Rockefeller Foundation was making large-scale national philanthropy systematic, especially regarding the study and application of modern medicine and scientific research. It opened offices in Europe, launched scientific projects in Britain, France, Germany, Spain, and elsewhere, and supported health projects of the League of Nations. Finally, with the acquisition of most of the stock of the Ford Motor Company in the late 1940s, the Ford Foundation became the largest American philanthropy, splitting its activities between the United States and the rest of the world. Outside the U.S., it established a network of human rights organizations, promoted democracy, gave large numbers of fellowships for young leaders to study in the U.S., and invested deeply in the Green Revolution, whereby poor countries dramatically increased their output of rice, wheat, and other foods. Both the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations were heavily involved in building research universities around the world. In the 1950s, the Ford Foundation wanted to modernize legal systems in India and Africa by promoting the American model. But the plan failed because of India's unique legal history and its sort of traditions and religion and, well, as well as economic and political conditions. And the success rate in Africa was no better. So Ford turned its attention to agricultural reform. It should be noted that religions in differing cultures have their own concepts of philanthropy. Countries such as Indonesia are bound by the Muslim concept of zakat, which means alms giving. In India, corporate social responsibility, or CSR as it's called, is now mandated, with 2% of net profits directed toward charity. In terms of individual wealth and philanthropy, Asia is home to the majority of the world's billionaires, surpassing the United States and Europe in 2017, with 3 Asian economies in the top 10. 698 in China, 237 in India, and 71 in Hong Kong. That's as of 2021. Now, traditional philanthropy and impact investment are distinguished by how they serve society. Traditional philanthropy is usually short-term, where organizations obtain resources for causes through fundraising and one-off donations. Impact investment, on the other hand, focuses on the interaction between individual well-being and broader society through the promotion of sustainability, stressing the importance of, for example, housing infrastructure, healthcare, energy. A preference for impact investment philanthropy is gaining prominence in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations since the year 2015. And almost every SDG is linked to environmental protection and sustainability because of rising concerns about globalization, consumerism, and population growth. Last, but hardly least, philanthrocapitalism, yep, would you believe it, differs from traditional philanthropy in that it is affected by business in the market, where profit-oriented business models deliver, for example, curricula in education, and strengthen their own businesses because they're improving people's job prospects, but by doing so they benefit themselves because then they get to hire the same people who generate more wealth. In this, philanthropy is seen as a tool to sustain economic growth based on human capital theory. There's also a philanthrocapitalism where instead of being for profit, the philanthropist gives as a nonprofit and only breaks even or takes a small loss, but the overall gain to the community is greater than the loss incurred. And, of course, there's celebrity philanthropy, Moreover, philanthropy has been transformed by the rise of multi-billionaires like Jeff Bezos, George Soros, Elon Musk, Warren Buffett, etc., etc. It isn't news that philanthropy has been deployed by ultra-high net worth individuals to offset their large tax liabilities through charitable contribution deductions enabled by the tax code. For instance, despite Robert F. Smith's generosity in paying off student debt incurred by the Morehouse College class of 2019, he simultaneously battled against changes to the tax code that would have made more money available to help low-income students pay for college in the first place. We might term this form of giving donate a little with lots of publicity, reap lots of return on your investment behind the scenes. As a result, much criticism of philanthropic institutions and individuals swirls around their reinforcement of the prevailing status quo, and that they prevent and perpetuate income inequality instead of addressing the root cause of social issues. The Global Policy Forum, which is an independent policy watchdog that functions to monitor the activities of the UN General Assembly, warned governments and international organizations that they must, quote, assess the growing influence of major philanthropic organizations, and especially the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and analyze the intended and unintended risks and side effects of their activities, close quote, prior to accepting money from rich donors. Philanthropy from the super wealthy also manages to distract the public from some of the ill-gotten gains that were derived for profit from the marketplace. Yet it is direly needed. For survival, in many cases, what then to do? In general, unless philanthropy is involved with fostering the recipient's self-sufficiency, independence, autonomy, and control of resources, that is, empowerment, as well as sustainability, it is likely to turn into yet another way of perpetuating oppressive and highly unequal status. Simply put, when philanthropy puts its thumb on the scale of self-interest more than of philanthing, more than of giving, we're already in trouble. That was true of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, selling papal indulgences and bestowing charity to avoid purgatory and hell. And it's true today with philanthropic capitalism, e.g., the exposure of Purdue Pharma in encouraging the opioid epidemic and then donating some profits to great museums in the U.S. and abroad, resulting in the British National Portrait Gallery and the Tate London, along with the American Guggenheim, announcing their rejection of Purdue charitable giving. That at least telegraphs a shift in consciousness about philanthropy and, one would hope, telegraphs the direction of philanthropy in the future. It's time for our first break, but we will be back directly with Patti Chang. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMClive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Patti Chang, who is the co-founder and CEO of Feed the Hunger Fund. She has spent her entire career fighting for social justice. Some of her previous roles were as president and CEO of the Women's Foundation of California, president of the San Francisco Commission on the Status of Women, and as commissioner on the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom and on the San Francisco Commission on the Environment. She's originally from Hawaii, and she has deep roots in the islands and in California. Now, Feed the Hunger Foundation itself strives to alleviate hunger and poverty by promoting microfinance as a vehicle for personal and institutional transformation. There are slight cluck sounds on the tape of our phone conversation at the beginning, but then they soon go away. So if you think you hear chickens in the background, you don't. They're just glitches on the line. Here is Patti Chang. Patti Chang, welcome, my dear, to Women's Media Center Live. It's great to have you here.
Robin, it is so delightful to be with you.
Well, Patti and I have known each other for some time, and she, oh God, how do I describe you? You have been involved in social justice causes your whole life, but specifically in the philanthropy world, which some would say you were, the CEO of the Women's Foundation in San Francisco, and some would say that social justice concerns and philanthropy are really not necessarily on the same spot, or they don't overlap, and that philanthropy, depending on how much donor-driven it is, depending on a lot of stuff, is inimical to social justice. So first, let's address that. Why don't you talk about that for a bit?
The social justice movement is comprised of amazing people, particularly, as I'm seeing, young women in the forefront of issues around the environment and racism and the recent elections, shall we just say.
Yeah.
And they need a means of support. They need a means of living. They need economic justice to be supporting them in their work.
Mm-hmm.
And so philanthropy does play a role, and I believe a very important role in helping all of our movements throughout the various decades.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I think I became involved in radical politics, revolutionary, whatever you want to call it. It isn't your standard politics, but in social justice politics, in the first place, was that I hated money. I hated the idea that, people were enslaved to money. So, of course, what have I done ever since I became an activist? Fundraise. And so, so that taught me a very basic lesson. But you know what I mean there are all sorts of, I think they're called capitalism even, where unless unless it proves business worthy, you just can't cut it. I remember a time, I think it was before the UN conference in Beijing. So this goes back a few years, but I remember that the Ford Foundation, which at that point, it had a wonderful record under Frank Thomas when he was the director. But they were in a state of confusion after he left, and they changed hands many times. And I remember that they went to various African groups, women's groups, because this was a women's conference, and said, we would like you to be on panels at Beijing, on the Ford panels, because we are going to have a delegation of 60 or 70 people. And the women on the ground in the African villages said, actually, we would really like to have the money itself, we could start battered women's shelters and farms, and I mean, there's a lot we could do with them. We don't need to go to a conference in Beijing, all the way in Beijing. We can be quite happy here if you just give us the money and leave us be. But Ford said no. So the women who were willing were schlepped to Beijing, and the women who were not stayed home and stayed poor. Now, that kind of thing has happened more than once, and that's why I asked that question. I know that whenever you run a foundation, it's rather different.
We don't believe that you can establish social justice based on the values of capitalism. However, how do we use money, currency, in such a way as to enhance the work of social justice or equity? And I've done that through the Women's Foundation as well as through my current work at Feed the Hunger Fund.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. How do you do that? Because that's not necessarily an easy course to follow. Talk about your work in Hawaii and all of the amazing things that you mentioned to me recently.
So it's interesting that you raised the women in Africa, because actually it was when I was on a visit there in the Kibera slums at the time, and we are going back several decades, where the women were being were contracting AIDS, and the retrovirals had come in, so they were beginning to recover from that. However, what a sister, a nun, told me was, but Patti, they need some way to make a living. And I realized at that time, after I had just spent the last 13 years running the Women's Foundation, where we made grants, that perhaps there was also a role for microloans. For small loans for these women to start businesses where they could also have their children not necessarily leave their side to go into a factory. And that's when I began to start Feed the Hunger Fund.
Well, it's so interesting because, of course, as you know, micro funds and micro lending was begun by a woman. Wasn't it Ella Bott? Who organized rag pickers and rag gatherers on the streets of India and gave them tiny loans, and then they started businesses, and then they grew the businesses, and she had something like a 99% return rate on her loans. But when it came time, years later, this had grown into a major thing, microcredit. Then when it came time for the Nobel Prize, a man got it, Muhammad Yunus, not Ella Bott. That made me cranky. Remember that? Oh, God.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about microcredit and talk about Hawaii and what's happening there, because that's amazing.
Sure. Well, Hawaii is 2,500 miles from any other landmass. So it is the most isolated place on this planet.
Wow.
And 1,500 years ago, Polynesians traveled to Hawaii, settled there, and some say there was a population of 400 to 600,000 people.
Wow.
They sustained themselves, and they had different forms of ensuring that agriculture was used and used appropriately, from the mountains down to the sea. It's a system called ahupua'a. Everyone is responsible for their particular, section that supports the land, supports the water, supports people. As one of my Hawaiian elders told me recently, Patti, it just feels so good that what we're trying to do is to turn property into aina.
Oh.
And aina can be translated as land, but it is really one's relationship to that land, to that water, your responsibility to care for it as it cares for you.
Oh, wow. Oh. And this functions how?
So, in the best of what we are seeing some organizations do is to try to reclaim the Aina. And I will talk about one in particular.
Mm-hmm.
There were, Hawaii, first of all, has been colonized ever since our queen, and previous to our queen being dethroned in 1893.
I remember going around with signs saying, "Bring back the queen." Yeah. Oh, damn. Okay. C is Hawaii,
C is Hawaii. And in part, why she was dethroned is she was standing in the way of sugar barons that were later to become also pineapple barons. So what was once an incredibly fertile place became overridden by sugarcane and pineapple. Sugarcane being highly extractive of water,
sure.
And both of them creating high amounts of acidity in the soil. Well, it's only been over the past 5 years maybe, that the last sugar plantation was closed.
Wow.
And this also was a system that brought, indentured servitude
to plantation labor. Yeah, of course.
Right. And what the sugar owners tried to do was to create a Tower of Babel so that each immigrant group that came in wouldn't be allowed. Well, they weren't allowed. They didn't know each other's language, so they couldn't organize. So first you had the Chinese, then you had the Japanese, then you had the Filipinos. The Portuguese were made the foremen because, of course, they were closer to being considered white.
White boys, yeah.
And the colonization system was perpetuated. So what my beautiful brothers and sisters, my colleagues in the field are doing are trying to reclaim their land that has been, and I will speak of one group, they're called Hui Mao for short, but it was overrun by eucalyptus trees brought in from Australia. So essentially there's hundreds and hundreds of acres of these eucalyptus trees because it was thought that Hawaii would provide the fertile soil. They could be cut down for timber, put on boats, and shipped to China for manufacturing. This never took place.
Why do they have this notion? Why do they have this crazy? Why do people have this crazy notion that what is there in front of you is not enough? You have to bring something from someplace else and intervene in what's there and create something else and then ship it out again without, it's really cuckoo. Oh, sorry.
No. People are incredibly ignorant of seeing what is in front of them and the beauty and value of that, particularly if they're thinking that their way is the only correct way.
Oh, of course.
So what Hui Mao has done is to reclaim 11 acres, and it's really tough work, and to replant in the soil of things that were more indigenous, things such as ulu, which is breadfruit, or other trees, hardwood trees, etc. Oh, here, their blossom lehua is what attracts bees. And actually, Hawaii is the largest producer of queen bees in the world.
This is getting better.
So they've done this for 6 years, right? Basically fighting back, trying to remove this invasive species. The county of Hawaii recently gave them a 75-year lease for an additional 1,000 acres.
Oh.
So this is what they're currently doing, but really reclaiming it in a way that is indigenous, that brings back the old ways of, harvesting as well as taking care of the land.
But it's practical. It's so practical, Patti. I mean, this is not woo-woo. This is not woo-woo and hug a tree and,
that's right.
Kumbaya. Isn't it lovely what we're doing? This is very practical and workable and real.
That's right. And as another Hawaiian brother recently said, people see it as Hawaiian culture, right? Woo-woo, as you put it. Well, perhaps they just need to hear it in terms of this is the science and technology of biosystems management.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely. If you smack it up with big words, then they'll come right. But it's true. It's really true. I mean, and this is the kind of thing that you're funding with Feed the Hunger Foundation?
Yes, these are the kinds of projects that we're supporting. So when we started Feed the Hunger, and the hunger is the hunger in all of us to make a difference.
Of course. Of course.
It really was to help those who are, it is using capitalism. It is because it was to support those individuals who are considered unbankable in the food sector. And you're unbankable because you're low income. You don't have enough collateral.
Yeah.
Or you're a woman, or you're BIPOC, or you're an immigrant, and you haven't been established in your business for 3 to 5 years.
Right.
Also, banks do not fund agriculture or restaurants because they're considered too low margin, too high risk, and therefore are not seen as investable.
But wait a minute there. That's also very crazy, Patti. I mean, because don't you say restaurants and agriculture? Those are the things that, feed people.
Exactly.
So if they're not being funded, you can't go on to do anything else.
It's thought that, the USDA can take care of agriculture or whatever. But yes, those are 2 areas not funded.
Wow.
Unless you're so well established. But you have to get to that point.
I see.
That's where we come in.
I see. Oh, how amazing.
So we're supporting farmers that are on less than 10 acres of land.
Less than 10 acres of land. So these are these are really micro farms and with micro funding.
Right.
And that's where the women come in.
That's where the women come in. Many times it is jointly with their partners, their husbands, etc., to run that small farm.
Sure.
Or their children. And yes, on my aspirational days, I think that we're trying to move towards food sovereignty. But on a day-to-day basis, I have to agree that what we're trying to do is to create food security and to provide access not only for people to be able to work the soil or the waters, et cetera, but to be able to feed those people that have less access to that food.
Of course.
To healthy, good food.
Of course.
And whether that's our seniors, our kupuna, those who are disabled, unable to get to grocery stores, those are the folks that we are concerned about. Now, I have to say, post-COVID, all of a sudden, I don't have to convince people quite as much that food is essential.
What do you know?
What do you know? Or that helping to support small businesses that are growing their food is important.
You also said something so interesting when last we talked about this. You said, when you're talking about a place like Hawaii and self-sufficiency, you have to understand that when there is, for example, a supply side breaks down and toilet paper, for example, isn't coming in at all. Well, what happens? what happens when you're many, many thousands of miles out there in the middle of the Pacific? Well, you know, and unless there is a kind of self-sufficiency in this sense everywhere in the globe, you're doomed. And that I found a very simple, interesting, educative idea that the big boys had overlooked considerably.
Yes. During COVID, ships moving between the islands stopped running. It wasn't profitable.
Oh.
And so for the people on Lanai, because as you know, Hawaii is composed of, 7 islands.
Yeah.
The ships were not coming in for a period of 3 weeks. Now, what that meant was for our modern day Hawaiian culture, society imports 85% of what we eat, and we export 90% of what we grow.
Oh.
Very different even from, 50 years ago when I grew up and we had things such as local chicken, local meat, local vegetables. All that through globalization has changed. So how do we recreate, perhaps not in the way that it was? I mean, let's use some of the new as well as the old science and technology, so
Absolutely.
to speak, and create what the islands need now to be more self-sufficient.
Yeah. Well, I was reading about the history of philanthropy and the etymology of it, and the original etymology, of course, is that philanth meant for the good of humanity. But then it kind of fell on bad times when the church came to power and took it over as caritas and whatever is good for humanity, as long as it's okay with the church. So, I mean, there was a general shift in trend where you got power boys moving in. And of course, that was the ancestor of what is now called capitalism. So this is a whole other approach. I mean, that puts not just resources, but power to act, not power over, but power to, back in people's hands and in local people's hands. And it's not opposed to globalization. You can do both at the same time. You can walk and chew gum.
Yes, and actually what I have found over my years of doing this work is, and I knew this beforehand, I just did not have enough money to do this, but what works well is marrying a grant and a loan at the same time. So
talk about why.
Ways,
talk about why.
Okay. Take a food truck.
Yeah.
That is going to cost you in California probably $50,000-$60,000 to have built and to be permitted, etc. Well, if you have a grant that can go to pay for your working capital, the supplies, the food that you're going to need to cook, that will help get you started so that you don't have to think about the loan. It gives you a little leg up. And that way you can start repaying the loan after you earn a little bit of capital to do that.
Got it. Oh.
It's similar to working in the fields, and how we've been doing it is you're not going to harvest for 6 months. So why should I start charging you interest and principal until you have the capital to start paying back?
But it's compassionate.
It's common sense.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, wow. Why, that the lender would say, why should I start charging you? Itself goes against everything that we've been taught and everything that we've been brainwashed about. But this is amazing.
when I started, Robin, because I come from a feminist background and all of this, I really thought, and many of my philanthropic friends did not think I should be making loans. I should just be giving grants.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to learn about the financial system because so many of us on the social justice side see that as
the enemy,
the dark side.
Yeah. Mm.
The Darth Vader. And I really wanted to learn about it, to bring it back to communities that I love and care about.
Oh.
And I'm still in the process of learning, always.
Well,
and we're trying to figure out ways to make it useful.
Well, these all seem extremely useful ways, and loving ones and compassionate ones, and very, very practical ones. I mean, and you've always done that kind of marrying of the practical to the idealistic, which is, of course, how we move forward, if we move forward at all. And at least the recent elections have shown that we're capable of moving forward. So, Patti,
Yes.
Dear Patti Chang, you wonderful, wonderful woman. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Will you come back and talk more about more kinds of? I mean, I think it would be very interesting for people to just learn the kinds of groups that you are loaning to or funding or granting, because that in itself tells us where to look for our sustenance, for our leaders, for our community. So
I would love to.
You will. Oh, good. Bless you, dear Patti Chang. Thank you so much for being with us today on Women's Media Center Live.
Bye-bye.
We have to take one last break, but don't go away because I will return with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Sister, can you spare a dime? Those are fighting words. You know, the famous phrase is actually, the love of money is the root of all evil, not money is the root of all evil. Unsurprisingly, female philanthropists have been deeply involved in every movement, campaign, or wave for the liberation of women down through time immemorial. Libraries are now being written about the philanthropists of the suffrage movement, finally. How they gave not only what funds they had, but their own energy and dedication. Not that women controlled much money in their own right in those days. Indeed, there were laws up until the 1970s controlling women's financial independence. It was the rare woman who had earned, or even been able to earn, her own money, much less make her fortune, to dispose of as she wished, as did Madam C.J. Walker, the first black woman millionaire in America, who built her wealth in the late 1800s thanks to her homemade line of hair care products for black women. Only now are we beginning to unearth, thanks to feminist historians, the names of women who financed the suffrage movement, the temperance movement, the abolitionist movement, halfway houses for women emerging from prison, the shelter movement, and so on and so forth. Even such groups as the Salvation Army and Alcoholics Anonymous, women funded. It's no exaggeration to say that in a reversal of philanthrocapitalism, women benefactors mobilized to support every possible cause other than their own for many years before the suffrage movement or anything like it emerged, sort of ventriloquating their rage and pain onto other suffering groups first. What we're discovering today is that many women of inherited wealth are drawn to the women's movement for their own liberation, quite understandably, for their own survival. Sometimes it is a matter of literal survival. I can think of 5 women of inherited wealth who were sexually abused by men in their family. Without effort, I can think of them. Furthermore, fathers who are giants of industry patriarchally assume and presume that their sons will succeed them. And on board after board of various trustees, we find the sons, and even, as with the New York Times, the sons-in-law being listened to and pegged for inheriting power, while the daughters, if they're allowed to sit there at all, are ignored or expected to nod their heads and vote the way their father and their brothers wish. Sally Bingham was one of the first and most notable such women who refused to do so. A serious, fine writer herself, she immortalized the story of how she basically brought down a newspaper empire to gain her rights as a female human being in her wonderful book, Passion and Prejudice, a family memoir. And there are many others. Some of them decide to devote their support to specific causes. The late, great Deborah Ann Light focused her funding on women over age 55, thus fostering late creativity in women that many others said would never surface. Given the overlapping obstacles, subtle and blatant, of sexism and racism and ageism and all the isms, there are more than a few late bloomers using their earned or inherited wealth, like laser beams, to address particular political oppressions. These women are activists. All this, you understand, is in addition to the charitable giving that women traditionally have done and still do for such non-political causes as breast cancer and other diseases, children's illnesses, causes that especially touched their own lives in personal ways, and, of course, the arts. Because the U.S. government gives to arts in this country approximately the same as the government of Latvia. In fact, it was considered more fitting until recently for women's philanthropy to be directed in these more traditional directions than to issues affecting policy that might have an impact on their own lives. But that is changing fast, as are women's political contributions to campaigns. All of the above have evoked and provoked interesting insights into women and wealth. Money as power. Money as power not to be denied or fled from or feared. Guilt at having money and thus power. Women slowly learning the financial systems that have been constructed around and above them, often to deliberately exclude them. Women learning to demystify the process of donation, and to do so without being patronizing or condescending or feeling it as a shame or a guilt. Contrarily, women being able to accept financial support for their causes and their work with pride, even unto the development of advisory groups like Women Moving Millions, specifically to aid and guide women's chosen giving in a multiracial, non-ageist, feminist context, free of sexual categorizations, ableism, class distinctions, and all the other legacies of patriarchy. As women more and more learn to grasp and manage their own wealth, such groups and organizations may become less necessary. And then the transformation of philanthropy will be an interesting one indeed. Those are my fighting words. Add yours, for the moment only, on Twitter And remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor Regina K. Scully, WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.